Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. Enterprise AI isn't just a tool, it's the heartbeat of smart organizations like yours, helping to reinvent work to deliver higher growth, more customers, and better experiences. Join us as we discover how AI-powered work orchestration and automation is making things better for everyone: customers, employees, shareholders, and most importantly, you. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Marchuk. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. In this episode, we'll be chatting with Danya Dhiraj, a director at Citisoft, where she's had quite a lot of experience delivering complex technology and operation change for asset managers. Danya has written a great article called Implementing Artificial Intelligence in Post-Trade Operations, a Practical Approach, and that we'll be exploring that today. So now, Danya, I know I have not done you justice in your introduction there. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Because I'm sure there's a lot more to it.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me. And yes, hello, everyone. So I'm Danya Dhiraj. I'm currently with Citisoft, a boutique investment management consulting firm. And as a firm, we specialize in helping asset managers, wealth managers, asset services, as well as asset owners in trying to problem solve wherever there are difficulties and they need assistance with in the whole front to back operating model. And from my perspective, yes, I've been with the firm for about 2.5, 3 years now, but I've been in the industry for about 20 plus years. Yes, I've grown from doing core BAU operations at the very beginning of my career to changing roles very often and progressed to being a BA, to PM, running projects, leading projects, solution design, so on and so forth. And now I do varied hats across the whole life cycle of how a project is delivered and solving problems.
That makes sense. And now I've done consulting a while back too. And you're right, you wear like all the hats and sometimes you wear them all at once. So I understand how that goes. So your article starts out, this is a wonderful quote. It says, for decades, post-trade operations have been dominated by manual, monotonous, and inefficient processes. And to mitigate these errors, investment managers have often implemented risk management procedures and automated processes. But despite that, post-trade operations are still not really optimized. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of scope for optimization and change of processes that is required, right? We always know, and it's no news to anybody, right, that operations is filled with manual tasks, which are repetitive and quite arduous in a lot of instances. And that was one of the key reasons for me itself. I wanted to move on. It's like, how long can one do operations, right? You have to move on, try different things and different flavors of doing things. So yes, that's very much true. So it's about seeing what can we do. We've progressed, i.e. when I say we, the market in general has progressed in a lot of automation, but it's now saying, is that enough? Are we in that stage of, oh yeah, I'm done with all automation and this is the maximum extent I can go to? Or is there more to look at? I think that's what's interesting to see which direction we're going to head into.
Right. And I know investment management firms are, there's a wide range. You've got a very large spectrum from those who haven't started any automations at all, and they're doing everything manually, to some that are very much more mature and have automated, a bunch of stuff, but still not everything, right? And so your article dives into some really interesting developments now as we go into AI. And as we start looking at some of these things, there's a certain level of, wariness, I guess, about AI, because we've heard all about the hallucinations and then stuff, but then now they say, well, the models are better and things are, we've got governance things in place for some of the models. But are we really truly ready to trust AI with our financial future? Are we just scratching the surface of its potential here?
You hit a very powerful word there, right? Trust. That's quite interesting. It's not easy for us to gain trust, and that's being human, which is but natural. But when we look at AI in general, right, we know that in the industry, a lot of people have adopted to using robotics, i.e. RPA, and the varied early forms of AI. There are a lot of firms who are using it. But the new kid on the block is the whole Gen AI or LLM, so on and so forth. I'm kind of using the word AI a bit more generalist that runs across whole show. So there are parts of AI, or it's in the very nascent stage in our industry, where there are some vendors and fintechs who have started adopting it in baby steps. But when you look at some asset managers who run a lot of operations in house, they are not there yet. They're still more in the use case stages. So it more depends on how much of comfort do I have there to get into it, and this is not surprising, right? Innovation is something that we all love. We always talk about it. But now what we are looking at is an industry-wide transformation. That's not easy at all, right? It takes a lot of grit and time to get through that process. And I think that's where we are. I think in varied firms are in varied stages of the transformation journey. So some of the key considerations that we might want to look at is we know that AI can process large amounts of data in a very near real time and in a very speedy manner. And that's, yes, a tick in the box. The next comes the whole accuracy and the quality of data. So do I know that the data is accurate? How can I validate the accuracy? And I think that all boils down to how am I training the AI, right? It's all about human beings are aware because of experience where it is, but the same experience does AI have? I think that's still a doubt that exists in people's mind. And it finally comes to the point of predictive skills. So how much can I rely on the predictive skills? That's one area where I don't think the adoption is as much prevalent as the use of core RPA and etc. So those are some things that we really need to bear in mind, right? And to your question, are we scratching the surface? I would definitely think so. Yes, we are. So if you look at, there's regulatory concerns is one of the key things that comes to the top of my mind, right? So you have the EU has just recently, as much as last year, they published the AI Act. And there are other regions who are looking at it as well. So if you look at a global asset manager who have operations across many regions, and there are different flavors of regs, if as and when the countries publish them, they're going to come in. It's going to be quite interesting to see how those global asset managers are going to adopt and implement it. But at the same time, is that going to deter them from adopting AI? It's a fine balance one needs to strike. So that's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. There's this whole lack of human judgment when we look at it from a trust perspective as well. As we say, that we've had the markets in general are volatile, and we've had ups and downs that human intelligence have seen varied examples, and we have precedents that, okay, if something happens to a bond market, this is how probably we need to react. But how much are we going to go far back? Are we going to go back a couple of decades in the back and train AI? Don't know. That's a question that I have as well. And the last point I would add here is cyber threats. I know it's not an area of specialty of mine, but just for us all to be aware, the threats are only increasing. And if in the operations world, if a system that deals and trades with operation gets hampered, the impact is significant. So that's something that we need to bear in mind and find ways of how we can protect our technology environment at the same time diligently using AI.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned one thing about the EU's rolling out their AI regulatory policies, and there's been rumblings in the United States even that individual states might have the same type of thing, where one state may have a fully regulated environment where another state may not have adopted anything yet. When you look across states and countries globally, it's probably unlikely that we're going to have a singular type of regulation that goes to that. So do you see how, or how do you see the environment for asset managers being able to weed through all this? Because I would think it could get very, very complex very quickly, because now there's dozens maybe of these regulations that they have to all comply with, in addition to the rest of the regulations that they're already worried about.
I'm very curious to see that if there are going to be so many varied flavors of regulations that come in globally, there has to be some kind of a baseline, right? There will definitely be some fundamental, let's say, similarities. They're not exactly the same across all regions. So I think that's for sure that every asset manager, an asset owner, or wealth manager will end up adopting those basic flavors. And then their whole framework and the technology that they are building to cater to each of these needs to be agile and flexible enough that each of these varied flavors are also attached to. So it's very, very easier said than done. But I think it's important for regulators to have that in mind as well, to ensure that by getting all these regulations in, that they don't deter people by adopting AI. But at the same time, we don't want to let everything run loose, right? That people make their own decisions. So that balance is something that everybody in the industry needs to bear in mind.
Right. That makes sense. Taking, I guess, the opposite side of it, saying because we say, AI can process so much data and is really good at seeing some great insights that are kind of hidden from folks. When we look at the operational practices that are in most asset managers, how can AI's role reduce the operational errors and even potentially regulatory penalties for this post-trade process?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of potential for AI to help in the core operational processes, right? So one or two examples that I can think of at the top of my head is let's look at matching and settlements, right? So it's very, very important that your trades matched and settled on time. I'm sure in the near future, in sometime in our conversation, we'll address the D plus one part of it, but I'm not getting into that at this stage. So it's one is look at the state of the processes, right? So why are there so many manual touch points for organizations that do have? Some have a good amount of straight through processing, which is brilliant way to start off, but some have manual processes. How can we automate it? Can I do it in-house as my firm? Or can I outsource it? Or look at there are multiple vendors in the market who have advanced technology that help them automate the process and ease the manual touch point. Can I use them is one thing. And then if I look at the use of AI from a perspective, right, then so when I'm executing a trade, is it possible for AI to tell me or flag me, when I say flag me to the operations user, oh yeah, this is kind of, a tricky situation. We've had instances in the past that this trade has always, or security has always given me trouble to match and settle on time. So hello ops user, please bear in mind and gives a heads up. So, that gives me as an ops user ample time and I'm being proactive to try and settle it. So that's one option of looking at it of how AI can help, right? And the next one is say reconciliation. It's a very arduous process, as we all know, but to be very fair, the standard code-based, rule-based coding has made a lot of improvements and changes and optimized the process quite well thus far. Recons that used to take hours and hours to run can now run in actual minutes, which is a huge progress that we've made in the industry. So as the next step, when I start thinking, I'm very trying to be as creative as I could practically, hopefully, we are able to actually, I will be able to help us in all of this. It's about trying to see that, okay, now the rec is run, that process is optimized. Now, when you come to the time where it is spent is the whole exception management process. So if I have a break, that I need to talk to an external party to try and solve for it, can AI, again, using its own predictive skills based on past data, generate that communication for me and show it to me, right? I'm not asking the system to send it out on its own, but generate it. And then the user can, based on their experience, i.e. that's where I think the human intelligence is extremely powerful and comes into play, to have that oversight, authority, and power to review, validate, make changes, and then get it out of the door. So I'm not looking at systematically getting out, we're nowhere near that. But at least if that little bit of manual step is automated with the help of AI, that's probably a good thing, right? And probably the final point I would touch on is on reporting. So let's talk about reg reporting or client reporting, any kind of internal MI or any shape or form, right? It's all data. So you take the data from one or many sources to MySid, validate it, and then produce and translate it into a meaningful format based on what the end user really wants. That's all, end of the day reporting is. And yes, there's a lot of automation in play as well that exists today. The next step from where I think AI can help is if I take an example of, EMIR regulation and EMIR reporting aspect of this, majority of the processes to generate the report and send it to a trade repository is automated. But when it comes to exception management, this is where, again, predominantly it is human intelligence that is used today. So can we take a step up there and say, okay, can I understand how, with the help of AI, how these exceptions have been solved for in the past? What was the root causes? How have I solved for them? And again, try and use it and solve those exceptions, or at least come up with optionalities rather than the user having to go and dig out, oh, I remember having something like this a month ago. How did I go and fix it? Instead of doing that, if the system can do that and throw it on the screen, then the user will be able to validate it and have it solved, right? So I think that oversight of human intelligence having one with the core heavy lifting being done by this AI, I think will add a lot of value.
It sounds like we have the option because you mentioned there's already automations in place. And so it looks like a mix of these technologies could provide a lot more benefit than any one of them standalone could. And not only for taking the rules-based automations, which have, as you mentioned, have come a long way to be able to really produce a lot of output, but also go to the next step, which is like, well, I'm taking all these rules-based, but I always had to go to a person at the other end of it for specific things that perhaps were just outside of the capabilities of a rules-based system. But now we have this AI capability that we can kind of filter in and factor in as well to, again, offload some of that activity from the humans. Not that humans can't do it, but because of the volumes and the timing, which we're going to get to right now, we're really looking at this as the time is getting compressed. How can we do this more effectively and efficiently? So with the European market, going towards T1, T+1 settlement, or even, the future T settlement, right? Can AI realistically address the complexity of the settlement failures or the inefficiencies that are just part of the process?
Yeah, I definitely would like to think so, that there is a lot of scope and potential for AI to solve. If we look at what are the core concerns that we have in the current state today, where we are in a minimum T+2 market, and when we compare that with where we need to go to in the next couple of years in EU, with October 2027 is our target, right? With that coming up around the corner. So our processing time is going to be drastically reducing. And then we have our manual touch points that are still in play. We've got settlement failures going to be increasing, resulting in CSDR penalties. We've got ethics issues. There's time zone issues. There's, you just name it. It's never ending. The list can go on. And how my corporate actions are processed today. There are a lot of aspects in there that are requiring to be either increasing the level of core automation or take the help of AI in trying to step up to where we are now, right? So we spoke about the example of matching and settlements of how we say, if I'm executing a trade today, and if I know from the past that, yes, oh, that's a high risk trade, and how do I classify high risk? Either in terms of the value of the trade, or I know the last 3 or 4 times consistently that specific security of a trade has always been a problem for me with, again, a counterparty, which is, again, that can be a combination that can be looked at. If I'm going to buy an IBF share with counterparty Morgan Stanley, any broker with them, and that's been an issue, then how do I go and solve for it? Give me that highlight as an ops user, throw that to me and flag it to me so I can try and talk to the brokers and try and, get up to it right now rather than waiting for it tomorrow. So that's one thing that, we need to really think about. And on a slightly different note, if you look at some of the complex derivatives that are in place, there's still a lot of manual process in there, right? Where the trades are actually entered into the order management system manually. You still are reliant on paper firms to have those processed. So I think that's where NLP can hugely help. Again, some firms are using it. I'm not saying no one's using it. There are firms who are using it today. So how can I scrub all of that data and create and change that unstructured format into a structured format, and then use your automation cycle? And the vendors are offering it today, but yes, it comes at a price point, right? So small and mid-sized firms might not be able to make use of those technologies because it's pricey. But if there is market-wide adoption, then automatically, the demand is higher, your pricing gets lower, and then it could be, easily accessible for multiple market players as well. And if we look at settlements as well, what are the 2 common issues why trades fail when we look at T+1 in general. One is lack of funds in the account, lack of money in the account for us to sell. And then lack of security. So the quantity, I don't have sufficient quantity to transfer the security from A to B. So these are the two core areas. So again, at the time of execution, can I see, when I say can AI check, is that security pledged out to a different counterparty or collateral? Can I initiate that recall right now and then and flag it to the user, say, Mr. Ops user, go and recall the security and SIPs unit, rather than for it to peek through, value it, come back the next day, and then the Ops user realize time is of a huge constraint. So how can I optimize that process? That's the thing. And then funding. Again, if there's lack of funds, can I initiate the ethics? Auto FXs are very common these days. You have multiple custodians who've been given the power of attorney and right to execute ethics. So can we see how we can increase the amount of AI involvement in there and execute ethics as well systematically so that I don't reach a stage of lack of funds at all? So those are the things which I think are quite, key things in my head. The one thing I would like to reiterate is, right, so it's, yes, we are talking about all these nice to haves as of now in how AI can help. But I think in my head, there are some fundamental changes which are required in the market. So two things that come to my head. One is all about the whole legacy infrastructure. If you look at the market-wide, there's huge amount of legacy infrastructure that's there, be it from either hosting a piece of tech on-prem instead of having it on the cloud, or the UI not being very user-friendly. I think those are, two of, this is small things, but I think that legacy infrastructure needs to be completely overridden. And the next aspect I would look at is the market fragmentation. So I really honestly dream of a scenario in the future where every player in the market uses one singular system to do the whole processing, i.e. the operational processing. I know it's very far-fetched, but there's no harm in dreaming big, right? So if at all we reach that stage, then that's going to be huge. So it's like, yes, you have vendors who offer, there are some key vendors who offer that in the market. But if you take a step back and look at it, for execution of a trade to the point of getting that trade details to the vendor, every firm has huge amount of systems and they're all very disparate. And to go from A to X, you have to have multiple hubs in place. So can I combine all of that and have one unified standard process? So I think if those two are not going to change in the near future, then AI is more a band-aid and a sticky tip on top.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I mean, to your point, with the legacy applications that are in place right now, and your dream of a singular type of system that would be able to do this, we are still light years apart in that because of reality. But to your point though, we have had a lot of change come very quickly. So as we start looking to maybe the not too distant future, as we start as organizations start looking at the fact that how do we realistically hit a T+1? How do we realistically hit a T? How do we get to that actual settlement date of the same day? Is it possible? Maybe it is. And by reviewing that sort of those kind of constraints, maybe the industry as a whole will come up with a better plan. Maybe because they feel it's a benefit to them, but probably more likely they'll probably be regulated into it, right? And at that point, they're going to start seeing some real need to be able to do things differently than they have in the past, which will likely, at least this is my interpretation, it would likely force folks to look at their systems in a very hard way. Can we even do this with what we have? Or is it time to make that transition? So
it's doing small changes as against doing huge transformational change, right? I think some firms are still way far back in their infrastructure, the legacy systems that they have. And yes, that dawn has to come in and they say, okay, I'm scrapping and starting from scratch rather than me trying to fix the little gaps I have.
Right. So, hey, that's a great place to go, because we talked about there's a spectrum of firms in their maturity levels, and some who are doing things manually and maybe not super mature, and others that are very mature with quite a few systems that they're kind of making work together. Um, what are the risks for these asset managers who aren't fully embracing AI now? Because I suspect there's some real risks for falling behind on AI adoption. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think so, right? So, what are my risks of falling behind of not adopting AI? Yes, there are varied stages of in which firms will start adopting, but I think firms have to start somewhere. One, I think key is competitive advantage, right? So if there are peers in their market and their competitors who are starting to adopt AI and some firms are left behind, then yes, the lack of competition that they would have, being able to, work through and trying to be the top of their peers amongst the group of their peers, then that's going to be a challenge. And if we continue to keep having manual processes and bespoke processes, then automatically there is going to be scrutiny from a regulators that will eventually happen at some point in time, right? So that's something that people have to be really wary of. The operation cost is going to just one way, right? If I'm not automating, if I'm not using the latest technology that is coming in, if I'm not using AI over a period of time, right? Just taking those small baby steps and eventually, trying to have a better technology framework, the operation cost is going to increase. It's very easy to say this, but yeah, it's to actually implement it. It's going to take a good few decades for the industry to move to that space, which I think is where some of the key aspects. But it's currently the thought process is more about use of AI is more a luxury for me, and it's more the how I'm looking at to differentiate myself against my competition. That's where we are today, and that's fine, and there's nothing wrong about it at all. But I think over a period of time, which I don't think we can define at this stage and what that period will be, AI will become a necessity. So I think given, and again, looking at the generation, the next gen that's coming in, right, where all technology is probably going to be the key. And when they move into the workforce, without having AI, it's probably that generation might be lost as well. So I think those are the things that we really need to bear in mind. There are a lot of missed opportunities that are there. Why can I not automate and optimize my corporate action process better? Why can I not optimize my collateral operations better? Increase more efficiency in recon, so on and so forth. So there are definitely missed opportunities that I'm not suggesting in any shape or form that this is an overnight change. You can't just lift and shift the current state operations into a very fancy future state of AI. It's going to be a very gradual progress running over a good few decades in the future.
Well, it sounds like too that maybe those technology laggards might have a slight advantage in that they don't have necessarily the sophisticated tools that had to be built over the legacy systems in the past. Maybe moving forward and kind of leapfrogging from that middle stage to the newer AI driven technologies could actually give them a significant advantage that they don't have to spend the time of converting and moving through multiple systems and undoing what they've been doing for the past 10 years. So it's a possibility that, maybe those laggards, the tortoise is going to win the race that the hare's been sprinting on, right? So
You never know. I'm sure we'll hopefully be around to see what happens.
exactly. So with all this pace of change, we talk about regulations, and regulations is something that we get sprung upon, right? These are things that just happen, right? We have all these wonderful technology advances that just happen, but we also have regulations that just happen too, that a bill gets introduced and it's voted on, and the time to implement it is short. You only have 1 or 2, 3 years to be able to adapt to these new regulations. So first of all, understand them, and then to really wrap your hands around, well, how am I going to change my operations to address this? So when you're looking at AI, can AI realistically keep pace with these regulatory changes and doing all this stuff, or are we still going to be relying a lot on humans for this?
I think it's progressing at a very slow pace, right? And yes, people are conscious about it, about the pace at which changes can happen, but which I understand. taking AI and implementing it as part of their current standard operating model and their operating model framework is a huge change, right? So yes, that there is that reluctance there, and it's human for all of us to have reluctance to change, and even the operation users are reluctant as well, because eventually to have an impact on the way they are processing and the way they are conducting their day-to-day operations. So I agree with that. And from a regulatory perspective, the couple of things that again come to the top of my head are we have firms who use varied AI, ML, and NRP technologies to transcribe all the regulatory changes that are being announced by regulators across the world, and the ESMAs and the SECs and so on and so forth. So the language that is written, which generally comes with reams and reams of paper, where there's a currently reliance on people to read and interpret it, there is AI as a technology that's now interpreting it and reading it. So that's happening, but again, it's very limited in the number of firms who use it. And the second one that I can think of is from a compliance perspective. Again, the compliance regulations and the compliance requirements at a one-on-one level to again transcribe it from documentation and plug it into a system. There is AI that's being used. So those are positive changes that we're looking at. But on the flip side of it, we've spoken about AI is as good as how it is trained. So how much of that training does AI have now, and what in terms of quality, and how far back shall be gone? Especially from a legal language interpretation perspective, there's generally, I'm nowhere a lawyer, but you've got a lot of ambiguous, legal framework that's there, languages that are can be interpreted in multiple ways. So is AI really that forward in being able to interpret it in the correct manner? Yes, it can interpret, but is that correct? We don't know yet. I think that's we've got to take everything with a pinch of salt at this stage, right? And the frameworks are so complex across jurisdictions. So it's not only just I've interpreted a reg framework for a jurisdiction, and that's not completely contrasting to a similar framework that has come into play in another jurisdiction. I think those are things that we really need to be mindful of. So I think where I don't think AI is very strong today is the whole strategic decision making, right? So you've got to consider the regulatory impact when you are defining an operating model. And in the world of operations, there are, as you are aware, definitely this huge amount of nuances, right? We could call it and say, okay, that's my standard operating model. But when we start digging into the detail, as we say, the devil lies in the detail, the amount of nuances and bespoke processes that's there for every firm is very, very different. And then add the whole reg piece on top of it. So that is amount of strategic decision making that's required. I don't think AI is anywhere close to it, right? Human intelligence is huge amount of experience and precedence in being able to design and deliver operating models that once reasonably successfully. Today, yes, operation is never 100%, never perfect. And I don't think it'll ever be, which I think we'll all be out of jobs if it's 100%. So I think it's those are the things which in my head, I think AI is progressing, but I don't think human intelligence and the oversight can ever be removed. Human intelligence at this stage is definitely indispensable, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's one thing to as you mentioned, consolidate, review, report, interpret. Those are all things that AI is very good at, especially over great volumes of data. Getting to that next stage of the strategy, there's the why, the purpose behind it. Well, AI doesn't necessarily have a purpose. Its purpose is whatever we tell it to do. So somebody is going to have to tell them to do that, to tell AI to do that. The other part of it too is you mentioned, just operations and how operations change over time. Well, if I'm adopting all of this new AI, in theory, my organization should look pretty differently than it does now if we have people doing those activities or other systems doing those activities, right? There's going to be a huge shift in how people are working, what roles they're in that next stage, right?
Yeah, I think it's going to progress from do to actually monitor, oversight, validate. It's more that kind of managerial kind of task is what eventually it'll progress into. But I don't think we can put a time to it at this stage, right? We'll have to see how the wider market adopts, how regulations come into play, and so on and so forth. And then probably, at least I hope I'll live to see it at the end of my career in terms of how the market is shaping up.
Well, like I said, this has been an interesting conversation. There's so much change happening in our industry. It's just amazing to see the things that are coming forward. But you're right. I think this next few years is going to be very interesting with the amount of change from a regulatory perspective, but also a technology perspective that all the people involved in this are going to have to embrace one way or another, right?
You're absolutely right. I think the way I would like to summarize it is human intelligence is not going anywhere. It cannot go. It's not stay in a stage where we can get away and replace AI with human intelligence. That's not anywhere in scope. At least definitely to the very far future I can see. It's all about coexistence, where you use both AI and human intelligence and help AI to for humans to not do all the monotonous and repetitive data-driven tasks. I think that coexistence and a hybrid model is what is 100% where the way forward is, where I perceive. Hopefully that locks.
Well, that is a great summary, and I appreciate you joining us today, Danya. This is a really great conversation, and I'll be looking forward to see what this next year brings in. Maybe we'll bring you on the show next year to see how the thoughts are at that point, because as stuff changes over the next year. But it was great talking with you today, and I really appreciate the discussion.
No worries. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me, Michael. It's been an absolute pleasure from our end as well.
Thank you for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C Blue Prism. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of enterprise AI, subscribe now. The future of work is here.